Good day. Today we are joined by Tafadzwa Chibanguza, the chair of the working group at the BRICS Business Council, responsible for manufacturing. Tafadzwa, welcome to BRICS Africa Channel.
Thank you. A great pleasure to be here.
Yeah, just to jump straight into it, can you just tell us what is the status of the global manufacturing, especially when it comes to BRICS countries?
What you see more and more is a growing theme, and this has its genesis, you might argue, in the post-COVID environment, where a lot of countries realize the vulnerabilities that do exist because of long lead supply chains. So for, if you like, post-COVID resilience reasons, you had a lot of countries looking inward. That was the general sweeping theme, if you like. It obviously intensified in the recent, say, 18 months for reasons that are also maybe not even just BRICS countries related, but you do see a lot of those headwinds intensifying in terms of countries looking inward, and the old playbook of you source local, manufacture where it's cheapest, and then supply is also breaking. So right now, the opportunity, if you like, for BRICS countries more broadly is for them to assess this new environment and what it means for potential opportunities for new cooperation, collaboration, and new markets in terms of this very solid grouping of countries who contribute considerably to the global GDP, considerably to the population as well. I mean, that does present in itself a market. So really the point I'm making in summary really is to say that the economic playbook, as it's always been known, is changing. It affects manufacturing because ultimately manufactured products are what are traded across countries. And really the opportunity for BRICS countries is to assess this environment and create a new playbook.
Yeah, you are quite correct that the new environment, be it COVID and the tensions and the conflict in the world, do really necessitate that countries diversify. What would you say are those diversification areas that South Africa should lead into, considering, for instance, India with its largest middle class? What the kind of high-end goods that you've seen in the floor here at Center Convention Center that you think we should focus on?
South Africa has the upper hand of being a very resource-intensive country. And that's defined as, if you like, resource intensity relative to size of the GDP. South Africa is strong in that regard. Now, that endowment is a gift of geography. Some might say, if you're going to use more religious terms, a God-given endowment. But I guess maybe the more neutral term is that is the gift of history, the evolution of history, where we sit with a considerable amount of resources across the board. Now, there's two opportunities there. The first opportunity is that a lot of the minerals that we sit with feed what is a big area, which is the greening agenda. That's across the board. So from a demand fundamentals in the context of making supply chains resilient through a greening of these supply chains, and I mean, that's a vast area of opportunity. There's the opportunity to supply the commodities that go into that environment. That's the first. The second part of the opportunity then leans on, and it's in a way related to the first, that because the resources are already here, the first area of opportunity would be how much value addition can be done locally, even at first stage beneficiation. So you can then always then go much further, deeper down into beneficiation. But I mean, that's where you get quite into a bit of competition around the world, around more value-added products, right? But the opportunity to capture first stage beneficiation into things like alloys, ferromanganese, so where you upgrade or you step up what is raw materials into the first stage of beneficiation and then supplying that into the global economy, and then for later then supply into these greening supply chains. We definitely think that's a major opportunity that South Africa can be supplying into. And I want to just maybe close off on a point in the sense that the demand fundamentals are good. So it's another thing if you're trying to create this market, but the investment going into the, if you like, green agenda and the potential that it presents good demand fundamentals. So the business case to supply into that is already strong. And I think from a South Africa point of view, and one might even argue, I know you didn't extend the context to Africa as well, but in the region sits a lot of these minerals also that feed into this decarbonization agenda, and that presents a real opportunity for South Africa and for the region as well.
Electricity is ready, and yet the financial managers, especially in Africa, the likes of African Development Bank, always talk to this point of the bankability of projects. What kind of work has been done to ensure that manufacturing projects are bankable to go to market?
Yeah, it's quite interesting that the comment about if it's an English word to say unbankability of projects, it's sometimes accused as being the cop-out for finance not wanting to play its role in development, right? But I think there's merit. I mean, we speak to the DFIs, developmental funding institutions, who have a mandate to deploy what would be risk capital into development projects, and they will even say, even with that mandate that we sit with, the bankability of projects and the skill set to take projects to bankability needs a bit more maturity, right? So that's the one element to it, and I wouldn't want to downplay that area in terms of the work that needs to be done around making projects more bankable. But that's not to say that the projects aren't there. The projects are endless. Funny enough, yesterday also on a panel that had the financiers, they also said the money is also considerably available. So you then have to what's then missing, the missing link here is how do you take projects from them being existing, the money being there, the middle link is making them bankable. So, I mean, my point would be that a lot of work I think still needs to be done in that area, but it's solvable. You know, it's unlike a conversation that we had earlier where if you don't have the resources, you don't have the resources. But a bankability is really a skills set. And that is definitely something that can be solved for.
Talking about skills, is there any exchange programs, be it with the Indian counterparts or Chinese or any other counterparts that have really played a magnificent role in manufacturing? Yeah. What's happening there?
Look, on the skills specifically, you would know that BRICS is constituted by 9 work streams, and one is skills. So active projects around skills exchanges are best answered by the work group that looks at that. But I'm not going to hospital pass the answer to that question simply by leaving it at that. What is an opportunity is technology exchange, which in a way is indirectly another type of skills exchange, if you like. But I was defining skills in the traditional sense of building a pipeline of human capital skills. You know, you can make that distinction. And what you do find is, at least in the manufacturing work group, one of the key themes that have come out of India's chairmanship, and in fact something we support, is what platforms can we have for technology exchange, for exchanging of best practice, and that's something we fully support. We've had a few series of India chaired meetings where they table these as critical deliverables that they would want to see from their chairmanship. So I can definitely answer that if you define skills with the nuance of technology as well as best practice exchanges, that is definitely happening, and we want to see more of that. Maybe I'll close off on this point that in what is very fortunate about the BRICS environment is that one is often working with countries that are relatively more advanced in some of the processes that, let's say, a South Africa can adopt. So there's only the opportunity to learn much more and adopt skills in the context of best practice and technology exchange.
And do you know at what level is, I would say, that sharing of knowledge and innovation within countries?
So at this point, what's been identified is the lack of platforms to facilitate the exchange of these technologies and the rest. You see, there's a bit of it is quite tricky because more often than not, when you are, sometimes technologies are linked to IP. So there's a natural constraint in terms of how easily you can share some of these technologies and the rest. So the identification has been that within that, with understanding that constraint of the IP environment, what can we set up as platforms to facilitate this exchange of this of technologies? So it is less than at company level, but I guess that's the beauty of having places like the Business Council and our counterpart in India and all the other business councils across all the other different institutions, countries rather, BRICS countries, in the sense that then once that agreement to develop platforms for information exchange, how it's then filtered into country becomes the easier part. It's getting that cooperation, getting the platform that allows for that information exchange, and that's where we are. And I think that's a step in the right direction.
Don't you see a risk in that? If you think about it, that you trade with the West and it has its IP and systems and is pushing for its systems, and the East is also doing the same, and you get into your environment that you procure a certain system and years later you want to repurpose or get it to speak to other systems in, let's say, in your hospital environment. What happens there? How do you resolve or how do you harmonize those systems?
I don't think there's yet an answer for that because at this stage, I think the dominance of systems coming, at least if you like, from the western side of the globe are quite entrenched. And I mean, that's something, and it's a function of history. It's a function of how, I don't want to call it development, but it's a function in which the world has traded. So we can't wish that away. But where we started this discussion was that as the world, not just order, but the world economic playbook changes, and the collaboration within BRICS says that there's clearly a change of the economic playbook. We need to diversify our technology sources, our partners, and all the rest. Therein lies an opportunity to start thinking about how to answer that question. But I certainly wouldn't want us to maybe take the position that you can irresponsibly make that change over because, like you're saying, sure, it could be a hospital system that's running on a system coming from a hospital system which could threaten lives, sure, right? So that needs to be done in a systematic way. But starting to think about that in the context of the hand has been forced by the fact that the world economic playbook is changing, and those technologies will also follow patterns of trade, because ultimately once you are diversifying your sources of where equipment is coming from, that naturally brings with it its own technology. So I think it's not a switch off.
No, it's definitely not, because your skill set from university level will tend to follow a certain systems in your manufacturing, and as well as the homegrown of how do we, as you said, that countries need to diversify and reduce the dependency on one system, so that the shocks like the COVID era hits us again, at least you are able to be resilient, which is partly one of the themes that India has gone with in this coming summit. I just want to maybe pick up on that, and that maybe is that what the BRICS Business Council is looking at when it comes to Africa free trade? Are we using South Africa as a gateway to all these different systems throughout Africa, or are we championing a indigenous engineering systems that we feel that Africa should really take bit of both of everywhere so that we can accelerate our industrialization in Africa?
So there's two ways to approach your question, and I think it's an important one in the way you framed it in terms of the role of Africa. So the first is that South Africa, it almost became something of a cliche that South Africa is the gateway to Africa. It was an abused statement, if you like. Sure. But it was also a valid comment, right? South Africa is the most industrialized economy on the African continent. A lot of what is needed from a industrial capability in the African continent is also located here. So historically then, the approach was always for, let's say, countries from anywhere really, east or west, were to set up here, build the capability here based on the existing ecosystem, and then supply the rest of Africa from here. So the gateway was always, I guess, a reality, right? That's the first part of the question, that gateway consideration or aspect does exist. Then the second side of it is that what South Africa was very responsible in doing when it was chairing the BRICS 3 years ago or 4 years ago was to make this not a South Africa as the immediate member of, let's say, the BRICS bloc. Instead of saying this was a South Africa opportunity for its time in the sun, it actually made it an Africa partnership with BRICS. So it was a gateway now the other way, where South Africa is taking Africa and saying that we have a real opportunity here to bring this major bloc that is not fully represented, because remember at the time, the other countries that are now BRICS Plus members weren't yet members. So the point then is that you had really an opportunity now for South Africa to reverse this now, where it's still the gateway, but it's facilitating Africa's role into there. On the point of the indigenous technologies, I think the way to approach that right now is it's not necessarily wanting to make it indigenous solutions for indigenous problems only, but it's to say, how do we plug what is South African, no, not even South African, what is African capability, resources, and potential into this global South environment. And within there, there's lots of opportunities for bi-directional benefit.
But then how do you convince other African states when you still get the likes of your West threatening with tariffs just by association of BRICS? What do you say to the East African countries? Hey, we like the bloc, the potential money is there, and obviously African countries have a diversification of where they can source partnerships. You can't grow from one block of partnerships in a new world. But what do you say to those African countries to say, hey, I don't want to mention BRICS, my AGOA business is going well with the US?
Yeah. I think the best way to approach it here is the way South Africa has also approached it, right? I think we get into a very, very tricky conversation if we always look at it as East versus West. Those tensions might exist at a perception or real level. I don't want to maybe go too much into that, but you might also argue that those tensions are at a political level, if you want to take it that far, if you must sort of unpack that last comment I made. But trade and commerce doesn't follow necessarily, or doesn't necessarily need to follow your political cycles. Yes, there might be pressure, but it doesn't necessarily need to follow. So commerce is commerce, irrespective of where it's going. So why I'm making the response in the context and the way I've opened the question, the answer to you, is that South Africa, or these African countries who might be looking at it as east or west, should also adopt the same approach, that commerce follows where there's opportunity, and really diversification is not only global south or global north, but all opportunities where they apply. In fact, if anything, it creates more scale. So looking at it as global south in an organized way creates scale. I mean, the other side of the world also creates equal scale as well. And lastly, I do think this is why the role of the business councils remains important, and the role that the business council is doing, and we ourselves as the manufacturing working group are doing, is to drive an agenda that says, what is the appeal of the BRICS market? Because once you sell that appeal, it naturally presents a business case for these other blocks that you're referring to on the continent to look elsewhere as well.
Yeah, I think India has done a phenomenal job in juggling those interests, even during the conflicts in Russia, and yet still be trading with the US. Even the Trump administration says, we've got great friends on the other side, you know. So I think that they've done and really navigated that very well. So tell me, what would be the three things that you think, if you can really achieve in the path to India, what will those be for the manufacturing sector?
Perhaps not three, but I'll give you one overarching one, and I'll build on it, and maybe in there you can pick out three comments or three layers. What we have been calling for is, earlier on we spoke about the fact that where are we in this information exchange environment? Where are we in this technology transfer and technology transfer environment? And my answer to you was, at least at conceptual level, there's agreement. At conceptual level, there's commitment from India that we need to develop these exchange systems. And what it very well will find itself in a declaration, most likely. I'm not preempting what could be in it, but let's assume it's in a declaration. So what we want to see, and this is the overarching theme, is that we want to see those commitments translating then into tangible benefit on the ground, right? Now that's a very big comment if you think about it, because in fact I might even argue then that whatever comes out of those commitments, and to the extent that they are converted to action, right? So what we want to see is the action of the conversion of commitment to action. You get my point. You then are not limited to three, you're never limited to the 10 work groups, right? All of them having commitments, and let's say each of them have 3 or 4 commitments per work group. You then have all of that literally opening up more than 10 work groups, three declarations, and 3 areas of cooperation, etc. So the point really is that that's what really we want to bring and support India in, saying we are fully in support of the way you are thinking about how to approach your presidency, especially around collaboration and cooperation, and things like how do we work together. And for that reason, then we then will think, if we came out of the India effort with that actionable steps that say this is how we'll convert our commitments to action, I think that in itself is the biggest win.
Yeah, it's both exciting time, and also both of for me it's a question time on how do you, with all the innovation and cooperation, how do you still protect the IP, especially in the digital era and the AI era, to say, hey, I've been working with this with the CSIR. I still want to go to market in the BRICS countries, but I don't want to be overtaken by the Chinese manufacturing counterparts, as well as the Indian counterparts, who have deep pockets to really scale it up, not only in the global south, but worldwide. Then the question really becomes, are you guys looking at that, or the protection of that data and harmonization of the laws that the data that you bring on the table still create some sense of sovereignty to with your data that you want to come to market with?
Look, in any cooperation pact where you've got multiple countries, issues of strategic competition will always exist. I do recall the conversation around how do we strengthen IP and have that consistent in terms of how do we recognize and respect IP rules, let's say, coming out of South Africa and them not being overtaken. You know, the scenario you've played out. I mean, those remain conversations, but issues of strategic competition will always be there. And really, that's why then the important role that needs to be played by business councils, but also the enabling environment that needs to be created. Let's say we are in South Africa. The Business Council and or the South African ecosystem needs to then be supportive of having what are ideas quickly executed into what you're suggesting as manifesting it into an opportunity. Because also there's the risk and also there's the reality, in fact, that if we create an ecosystem that actually only puts hurdles and delays the conversion of ideas to execution, you will get overtaken by your counterparts who are doing what you should have done as well, right? So, I mean, it'll always, there's always elements of, and you have to appreciate, in multi-country pacts, there's always issues of friction between strategic competition and who goes to market first. I do think there's a responsibility for business councils and local ecosystems to assist in fast tracking how these processes and I almost said manipulating, but manifesting opportunities and converting them to real opportunities. They have a role to play in that regard.
No, I think definitely BRICS obviously is one big opportunity, and we can't move forward without that block.
It's a real opportunity. It presents, like you said, a coordinated new market in the global south. Countries of similar, if you like, not historic evolution, but countries with a lot more commonalities. And I think that the power that brings us together is one that must be taken real advantage of. But I just want to go back to the IP conversation, if I can just sort of segue in a comment I also had as a second point. Earlier when we were talking about what opportunities are there to take advantage of for, let's say, even Africa and or South Africa, there are opportunities that I mentioned earlier on stage one beneficiation of minerals that are already here. So these minerals, to compete against a company in one of our BRICS counterparts who've got enormous scale on the downstream value-added production will be very difficult. But there are opportunities that don't even need IP. The fact that, for example, in many instances, the resource endowment is here, there's the opportunity for this block, this South Africa and Africa region, to manifest the opportunity that we want as far and high up on the beneficiation chain and value addition to any raw materials as we want to those initial raw materials. So you could say we want to take it to stage one beneficiation, which is alloys and maybe, let's say, very basic products of steel, or you say we want to take it much further up on the value chain. Of course, the competition gets more, but where you have a geological advantage in the form of that resource being based here, ultimately, you don't even need IP for that to be your strategic contribution to this block to take it further.
Tafadzwa, thank you for joining us on BRICS Africa channel.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.